Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this stakeholders meeting on the topic of chiropractors' involvement in the business of stem cell and regenerative therapies. I'm Dr. Mark Bronson, President of the Texas Board of Chiropractic Examiners. I anticipate that this meeting will last about an hour and a half, so our target for adjournment will be 3 o'clock. I'll state the agenda and our meeting purpose, and then I'll tell everyone how you can participate. Our agenda includes, first, I will state the meeting purpose, and then item 2 of the agenda will be a presentation on the science of stem cell therapy by Dr. Scott Wofford, our board secretary. Item number 3 will be a review of laws regulating the practice of stem cell therapy by Christopher Burnett, our general counsel. Item number 4 on the agenda will be a review of board complaints presented by Patrick Fortner, our executive director. And then for agenda item 5, we will have a moderated discussion and input from stakeholders on the issues surrounding stem cell therapies and the practice of chiropractic. Before I discuss the meeting purpose, let's identify our audience with a poll. Okay, with 86% of the votes in, the results are that 69% are DCs, 4% are MD or DO, 2% are registered nurse and or nurse practitioner. There are no other healthcare professionals, and 24% are not healthcare professionals. I have another poll question for you. And I thank you for participating in this one. With 81% of the votes in, and with asking you to check off as many as that apply, we have 74% want to learn about stem cell therapy and the laws. 15% are here to defend their business of stem cell therapy. 9% are here to protest chiropractors' involvement in stem cell therapies, and 26% checked other. I have one more poll question for you. This is just to give me an idea about how many of you want to participate. So with 77% of the votes in, 79% of the votes in, I'll close it. 82% of you do not intend to ask a question, and 18% say yes. So that will be just fine. And if you decide that you want to ask a question or make a comment as we move along, and especially when we get into agenda item 5, that will certainly be just fine. So for the meeting purpose, the purpose of this meeting is not to draft a rule. We feel that the existing law is clear, that it covers the current issues we're seeing and most of the foreseeable issues, and we doubt that a new rule will be necessary. In fact, there will be no action item on this topic in the November board meeting. No rule proposal will be offered on that agenda, only a discussion item so that we can openly provide the rest of the board with a summary of today's meeting. The purpose of this meeting is to make acquaintance with market participants and to enlighten each other. As the Chiropractic Professions Regulatory Board, knowing that some chiropractors are involved in businesses which offer stem cell therapy to the public, we need to understand these business relationships and the application of what's being offered. This has been a hot topic, quote, among regulatory boards across the nation for at least the past 3 years. The Federation of Chiropractic Licensing Boards, which serves as a resource to its member boards, including us, has hosted conferences with breakout sessions and roundtable workshops on this contentious practice. As will be disclosed in this meeting, there are problems associated with what has been called stem cell therapy in a market that has been called the Wild Wild West. We should discuss terminology, procedures, patient selection, the science, including the types of stem cells and their derivative tissues, the potential benefits and certainly the risks, and the qualifications of a provider who can legally administer the procedure. We should also discuss the common business arrangements and marketing methods, including the promotion, the referral, the order, the delegation, and administration of the injections. When is a doctor-patient relationship established, and with which licensed professionals? Who creates and signs the health record? Who makes financial arrangements with the patients? What are the financial incentives for the chiropractor? The format of today's meeting is an informal discussion. Participants include organizers like myself, panelists, and attendees. Our organizers include, besides me, our Executive Director, Patrick Fortner, our General Counsel, Christopher Burnett, our IT professional, Nikel Williams, and me. Our panelists include our Board Vice President and Chairman of Rules Committee, Dr. Michael Henry, our Board Secretary and Enforcement Committee member, Dr. Scott Wofford, and another board member and chair of the Education Standards Committee, Dr. Deborah White. Our invited guests on the panel include Dr. Stephen Myers of Fort Worth, who is fellowship trained in primary care sports medicine and practices non-operative and regenerative orthopedics, and Dr. Don Buford of Dallas, who is an orthopedic surgeon and founder of the Texas Orthobiologics Institute, and who I understand played professional baseball along with multiple other members of his family. We also have, the last I looked, 110 attendees, which certainly gives us an idea of the rather keen interest in this topic. Before we move forward with the agenda, I want to orient you to how you can participate. If you're an organizer or a panelist, you can control your own microphone and speak whenever you like. If you're an attendee and you have a question or comment, raise your hand, and when I see it, I'll unmute your microphone and invite you to speak when I feel like it's appropriate. Keep in mind that your comments are public. While we're interested in hearing from everyone who has insights to offer, we may have to limit certain discussions, and I reserve the right to mute you and, if necessary, eject you from the meeting. I don't think that's going to be necessary. We won't be using the chat feature, so no written questions or comments will be considered in this meeting. We want this to be a live discussion, just as if we were together in person. Organizers and panelists will sit around the table. Speakers on the agenda will have the floor to make their presentations, and attendees will sit in the audience. And when we get to agenda item number 5, raise your hand if you want to speak, and we'll have open discussion. So let's move on now to agenda item 2, which is presentation on the science of stem cell therapy. Dr. Scott Wofford. Dr. Wofford is a DC who holds a physical therapy degree and has co-authored 2 published research articles. Dr. Wofford has taken a special interest in this topic through serving on the enforcement committee for the past couple of years. And through his own business interests, he understands the level of authority within the medical and chiropractic practices. Dr. Wofford, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Bronson. Today we're going to be talking about MSCs. And MSCs stand for mesenchymal stem cells. MSCs are a very important part of regenerative medicine, but they're definitely not all of it. In fact, it is evident that they're, quite frankly, maybe a small part in the whole regenerative medicine process. One of the next acronyms we're going to talk about is HAM, and HAM means human amniotic membrane. In the human amniotic membrane, it contains 2 joint layers consisting of the amnion and the chorion. Fresh amniotic membrane contains collagen, fibronectin, hyaluronic acid, along with a combination of other growth factors, cytokines, and anti-inflammatory proteins such as interleukin-1 receptor agonists. And there's a lot of evidence that shows these tissues have anti-inflammatory, anti-fibroblastic, and antimicrobial properties. So the next thing that comes after that is what we call AFPs. AFPs stand for amniotic fluid preparations, and I think a lot of the topic today is going to be geared toward AFPs. These amniotic fluid preparations are common in regenerative medicine in doing injections into joints and other body parts. And these AFPs are obviously a derivative of HAM. So the question at hand that we have with this whole topic is, are all stem cells equal? And the federal government and the Food and Drug Administration have divided these into separate tiers. So the first tier I would like to go over is the tier which is considered the middle risk tier, which is tier 361 HCTP, which means human cellular tissue products. The eligible products for 361s have to be minimally manipulated for homologous use from one tissue donor to the other, and it cannot be combined with any other articles except for water, crystalloids, or a sterilizing, preserving, or storage agent. They cannot have a systemic effect and are not dependent upon the metabolic activity of living cells for their primary functions. 361s are not subject to pre-market FDA approval or clearance. The next tier is a significantly different tier. It's rated called 351 products. Now, 351 products include any cell therapies that do not fulfill the other tier criteria of the other ones, and they require a full pre-market biologics license application, and they must follow the same pre-market and post-market regulations as medical devices, drugs, and other biologics. So that's to say not all 351s are HCTPs, but some HCTPs are regulated as 351 products. Now, most of these 351 products are going to be in the form of autologous use. So I want to explain what autologous use is, and that's the term given to describe the first criteria for surgical exception is further designed as the draft to include implantation, transplantation, infusion, or transfer of human cells or tissue back into the individual from which the cells or tissues were originally removed. With respect to 351 stem cells, most of these cells are harvested either through bone marrow or adipose fat. You know, there's a lot of research that shows that there are high concentrations of these live stem cells, and I'm saying live stem cells in these adipose tissues and the bone marrow. Research also shows that these cells that are removed in the 351 fashion in the autologous manner do not age and they do not lose the regenerative capabilities, especially the ones that come from adipose tissue. And they seem to be more effective over time. But one of the most important characteristics of these MSCs, the mesenchymal stem cells, is that they are unspecialized cells with the ability to mature and to differentiate into multiple types of tissue, including bone, tendon, ligament, cartilage, muscle, and meniscus, etc. And they can self-renew by producing more stem cells. So the big thing right now is, where does amniotic fluid preparations and products fall under? And they fall under the 361 designation. Now, first and foremost, I want to say that there's a lot of research that show that amniotic fluid products, they have many good healing properties. You know, we do know that they have platelet-derived growth factors, bone morphogenic proteins, hyaluron, interleukin-8, and a lot of very good qualities. But I think one of the most profound things that I've been able to find is in a study that was published in the American Journal of Sports Medicine last year, 2019. The study was called "Are Amniotic Fluid Products Stem Cell Therapies?" And in this research study showed that they went to 7 companies that were in the market of making amniotic fluid products and preparations, and they were only able to I believe get 3 of these in. And what they did is the research showed that when you cryogenically freeze these stem cells and from the amniotic fluid products, it is virtually impossible to have, when you thaw them out to inject, it's virtually impossible to have live cells, live stem cells, when they are thawed out. And in their studies, the result of the study was very conclusive that there were no mesenchymal stem cells that were identifiable as live in the commercial AFPs or the unprocessed cryopreserved amniotic fluid at any time. And this is a huge study. This is one of the big studies that's basically saying, if there are 361s that come from amniotic fluid products, there are no live stem cells in this product. And I believe this research, by the way, it was done at the University of California, Berkeley, is instrumental in showing that stem cells, you know, for the most part, are not going to be viable and live in amniotic fluid preparations. Now, I did visit one particular company in Dallas, a company that invited me and was very impressed with Signature Biologics, and they evidently have a different cryogenic freezing methodology that they say, and were able to show me that there were some live stem cells at the, you know, after thawing in their product. But as far as I know, that's the only, and I don't know if they have published research. I believe they're going to be on this call. I don't know if they published any type of research to prove that they have, but as far as I know, and I think Dr. Myers and Buford can add to this, that there is no evidence, virtually none, that I've been able to identify that amniotic fluid preparations, once they're cryogenically frozen, have any signs of live viable stem cells. So the conclusion was, though, with these AFPs, that you should not currently categorize AFPs as stem cell treatments, but it is still a very promising tool for orthopedic treatments given the presence of cytokines and other growth factors. So the study was not designed to say, hey, this stuff doesn't work. It's designed to say there are no stem cells in amniotic fluid preparations after cryogenically frozen. You know, I believe it is very obviously these preparations can have and do have a huge effect in the regenerative medicine field. And I think it's very important not to confuse regenerative medicine with just stem cell injections. And as these other doctors will tell you, there's a lot more to it than that. And I've been able to visit with some of them, and it's quite impressive. But there's other treatments such as PRP, hyaluronic acid, and the previous mentioned biomolecules that tend to have a major healing effect on the healing properties and also a huge anti-inflammatory effect. But I just think we need to be careful not to confuse those properties with stem cells. It's my opinion that with all the misleading information about the stem cells treatments, it's important to understand that the procedures using amniotic, placental, or umbilical tissues, that they're not using live stem cells. And again, the only one I've seen so far is with the company in Dallas at Signature, and they hopefully will be publishing research otherwise. But as far as any of the other companies that I found, I just don't believe it exists. With all respect, the only way that I've seen, and with the research that I've done to get true live viable stem cells, is through an autologous scenario from the 351 situation of the own donor's body. I believe that the use of amniotic fluid through the homologous therapies has great benefits, and it has a huge potential in healing. But I just do not feel right now, Dr. Bronson, that besides the one company that I've met with, any of these other products, it's just going to be hard to consider them stem cells when there's no evidence of live stem cells. At the current research in today's that I've been able to find, and I've talked with people from Duke University, met Harvard, and actually Dr. Myers, and I just don't believe that exists. I hope to be proven otherwise. I think it's possible. I think there's a great potential with amniotic fluid products as far as tissue healing, but I think we just cannot confuse it with stem cells. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wofford. Obviously, you've prepared well for this, and we certainly appreciate your time and efforts in making this presentation. Agenda item number 3 is a review of the laws regulating the practice of stem cell therapy. And for this item, I call on our General Counsel for the Texas Board of Chiropractic Examiners, Christopher Burnett.
Hello there, everybody. Basically, there's some legislation that exists currently about stem cells. The most important one for our purposes is what is a stem cell, and that's defined in Health and Safety Code section 162.001, paragraph 4, subsection 4. And what it says is that an adult stem cell means an undifferentiated cell that is found in differentiated tissue and able to renew itself and differentiate to yield all or nearly all of the specialized cell types of the tissue from which the cell originated. So that's what we've got to look at here, from the board perspective. This is not a statute that we have any jurisdiction over. That's just the definition in the law right now. There's an additional Health and Safety Code chapter. It's chapter 1003 that deals with the specifics of clinical trials of stem cells, and then talks about procedures that need to be followed for those trials, and then also the exceptions that allow for certain products to be used without going through the trial methodology. As Dr. Wofford mentioned, I think we have a terminology issue, and I think this is something that we as the board staff run into frequently, is the term stem cells. It seems to encompass, at least out in the real world, stem cells encompasses a whole lot of things that don't meet the definition of stem cell. So what we see are sometimes licensees, either on their own or in the context of a multidisciplinary practice, advertising things that are that they call stem cells, that under the definition aren't in fact not. This leads to some issues about misleading claims and just clarity in their advertising. I think this gives our enforcement people fits, to be honest. And I think we need to be clear too, what we're talking about here is something that basically is not within the scope of practice for chiropractors, meaning the ordering of stem cell or any kind of use of these products if it requires an injection. That's clearly an incisive procedure. Chiropractors do not have the authority under Chapter 201 of the Occupations Code to do injections. So generally, it's going to have to be done through a referral, or in many cases we run into, these are employed in a multidisciplinary practice. You have somebody else who can administer these products under their scope of practice, but not under the chiropractor's license. Where we also see, this is more of a legal matter, is instances in where a chiropractor, as part of a multidisciplinary practice, evaluates a patient and does diagnosis on them, and there is a determination that whatever condition that you're presenting with is something that could be treated by these quote unquote stem cell therapies. And that chiropractor then basically signs the patient up for whatever the treatments are going to be, actually without being seen necessarily by the healthcare professional that actually does have the authority under their scope of practice to administer these things. That is a problem. And that's something our enforcement folks look at. So from our perspective, from kind of an enforcement legal side, I think those are the major issues that we deal with. And just to kind of second what Dr. Bronson said earlier at the introduction to this presentation, rulemaking, I think, is off the table for this. I think the law is pretty clear in Chapter 201 of what's within the scope of practice for chiropractors. And obviously, we're not in any position to make any changes or to modify by rule anything having to do with stem cells under the legal definition in Health and Safety Code, Section 162.001. That's about all I have to say on it. If anybody has any questions.
Yes, panelists and organizers, if you have any questions for Christopher, please turn your mic on and ask at this time. And also, I didn't give you all an opportunity to ask Dr. Wofford questions. Let's just say that I'm inviting you to ask questions of Dr. Wofford and Mr. Burnett regarding science and regarding legal before we move on to the next agenda item where we talk about the actual board complaints that we've received. And here, Dr. Buford, love to hear from you. Thank you for attending. I didn't get a chance to tell you hello earlier.
Well, like I said, I really appreciate the invitation to you and also to Steve to participate. I think it's a fabulous idea. We have to be multidisciplinary with this. And Dr. Wofford, that was a great summary. The one thing that I would want to point out, because it comes up at all of the conferences and meetings, and is the reason why I use bone marrow and bone marrow concentrate, is that bone marrow and bone marrow concentrate are not considered HCTP under the current FDA regs. And so as a result, the Section 351 and 361 discussion does not even apply because we're not even talking about an HCTP. And so that is a zone of safety for somebody who wants to be in this space where they don't have to worry about what is or is not homologous use, which is a discussion I'm sure we'll get to. But But that's one important distinction. Even with adipose tissue, there's been some question, but in this regulatory kind of stand down period that keeps getting extended because of COVID, at least adipose and bone marrow as the two autologous sources of mesenchymal stem cells have not been enforced against, other than in egregious situations where they're being applied in a location that they shouldn't be applied, outside of orthopedics, I should say.
I agree absolutely with that. And, you know, bone marrow has always been the standard of the cells, and adipose is obviously easily harvested. And I think what I was trying to explain and want people to know that you can't consider those anything close to amniotic fluid products. That's just totally separate animals, in my opinion.
And the other huge point you made, Scott, was that if you go to any PhD biology lab at any of our universities and you tell someone you want to get living stem cells or living cells, period, out of this liquid that's been frozen to -80°C, they're not going to do that in a 5-minute warm it in your hands thaw like all of the protocols from these companies. You just can't have living cells. And I've been involved in 2 of the publications that have shown that. You quoted a great one from Alan Hirahara and Alberto Pinero and Wyatt Anderson. Those are the 3 authors on that one you quoted. And there has not been a study published that shows you have living stem cells in these products. And there's been over 20 looked at now. So that was an excellent point.
Of all this, and I really spent a lot of time trying to research this and look into studies, and I've just not been able to find anything in the homologous world, especially with AFPs, that show living cells, especially cryogenically treated, like you said. And it just appears to me all the, you know, if you're trying to get to the true mesenchymal cells, you're going to have to do autologous, like what you're talking about.
Yeah, and the same day procedure, absolutely. That's no question. Yeah.
And Scott, one other thing I might point out on your presentation, you said that you spoke to a company in Dallas recently that was claiming that they had live cells, correct?
Yes, sir.
So there's multiple companies that have that in their literature to doctors' offices saying that we have these viable stem cell numbers, but independent labs, I know Chris Centeno has done a fair amount of work looking at these preparations where they say they have live stem cells, but these cells, when plated out, can't grow any colony forming units. And to really have live stem cells, you have to have cells that multiply and divide. And to date, I'm not aware of any publications that have proven or studies that have proven that these birth tissue products are actually able to form colony forming units, to my knowledge. I don't know if you have any other additional information, Don.
Well, that's
No.
why I'm saying, of all the studies I've read, you know, I met with that company, and I don't know if they published anything. That's what I was saying. But to my knowledge, I've not been able to find anything to show, you know, exactly what you're saying, quite frankly.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. And the only way to get around the biology of this would be to have a different thawing protocol, in my opinion, to have a living cell come out of something that's been deep frozen. And I just haven't seen that protocol. That would have to be, it wouldn't be on the front end of the freezing process. It would be, how do you thaw that appropriately to have living cells at the other end? Haven't seen it yet. Agree.
Based on everything I've read and researched and the people I've talked to, you know, it's just like you guys are saying. I think it's pretty controversial whether it's even possible to get viable cells that could colonize, you know, after the thawing process. And again, I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm by no means, you know, you 2 doctors are obviously in the business of doing this, but based on what I have read, if you really want to get true stem cell therapy, you're going to have to do the autologous same-day treatment is best that I've been able to find.
Christopher.
Dr. Wofford, I wonder if it would be useful for everybody if you or Dr. Bronson, Dr. Henry, Dr. White could explain what would be a situation in which a chiropractor would be involved with stem cells.
Well, first and foremost, what I would like to say is I think we have 2 different topics at hand. there's a lot of chiropractors that are involved in multidisciplinary clinics that are involved in what we call regenerative medicine that don't even claim to be doing stem cell therapies. And there's a lot of different, as the other two physicians will tell you, a lot of different components in regenerative medicine. I think the very important part is just to differentiate that there are very, very valuable and amazing parts of regenerative medicine that do not include stem cells. But I just believe on what I read and the people I've talked to, and which have been many, if you're going to claim to be doing stem cells, that if you're going to do a true stem cell therapy, it's going to be autologous, just as these doctors have mentioned. I'm by no means saying that regenerative medicine does not have amazing properties. I believe there's a lot of great qualities. I just think we're confusing regenerative medicine and stem cell treatments as the same thing, and I think they're can be two separate entities. And I would like these other the physicians their opinion on that myself.
Well, they're clearly different. I mean, the stem cell moniker is what's sexy, and that's what sells, and that's what makes up pretty websites and advertising and radio. So people say stem cell, even when they perhaps shouldn't, like you're saying. The field of regenerative medicine is far beyond just stem cells, and for that matter, the person that first coined the term mesenchymal stem cell doesn't even call it that anymore. He calls them medicinal signaling cells, probably because it's all of the other cytokines and growth factors and proteins that actually play the critical role in the healing cascade. It's not the fact that you're putting in our same day procedures, we're putting in between 25 and 50,000 stem cells in a given location if we're doing a 60 cc bone marrow draw. That 30,000 to 50,000 stem cells, they aren't all there a week or two later. They may send out signals that recruit more stem cells, but they're also putting out all these other things that are involved in the cascade. The interleukins you talked about, A2M, is involved in the plasma if you use it appropriately. And there's so many other things involved that we really don't know the appropriate, not only dosage, but also the appropriate interplay of what's happening. So that all gets summed up under stem cell therapy. And I think that's the crux of this discussion. That's the problem. It's not really a stem cell, especially when you have a product that can't, almost by definition, have a living stem cell in it.
Well, what I would say, and where I obviously agree with you, is with some of these clinics that are stating they're doing stem cell injections, there may be stem cells in that preparation. They're just dead. You know, and I think that's what the public needs to understand. I don't know that they're intentionally not telling the truth, aren't saying, I think they could say, yes, there are stem cells, but I think the public needs to know these are dead, not living cells. And that's what I think the research has shown. And again, except for this one company I've talked about, and I don't know if they've published or not, but I think until otherwise published in peer-reviewed journals, that's kind of the standard of care is what we know of.
Okay, Dr. Henry, what would you like to share with us?
Ms. Burnett, to get back to your question, as far as chiropractic role in any of this, you know, the only legitimate way I see chiropractic playing a role here, just as, you know, just looking at current rules and standards, would be if they owned a portion of a regenerative medicine clinic or a multidisciplinary clinic. As far as direct clinical involvement in it, that would have to be on a referral basis only that I can see, just because this is an out of scope issue for us. So, you know, as an owner of any business, there would be some liability there to any kind of misrepresentation from an advertising perspective. But I think that's whoever owns the business, chiro or layperson or MD. As far as clinically, yeah, you know, we could advise on a referral to someone who specializes in this or is within scope. But that's really the only things that I see, unless one of the other panelists, other chiros, can see a structure I'm missing or a clinical involvement reason for a chiropractor in this.
Dr. White.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Burnett, that's a really good question. And for the average chiropractic practice, I think it's important on a consultation basis to understand what a patient has been through post-operatively, as they post-operatively see us as chiropractors, having had these procedures done. It's important for us to understand the basic biology of this relative to the person's physiology and how they may present as a patient to a chiropractor's office. And then also, as Dr. Henry mentioned, in reference to referral, it's important for us to be able to very intelligently speak with our patients relative to the appropriateness of a referral and answer very basic questions.
Yeah, I think from an education standpoint, that makes a ton of sense, just making sure that we're all aware.
That would bode well to avoid providing misleading information to a patient, which of course isn't acceptable by any means. Patrick.
Dr. Bronson, we had a question from one of our attendees. If Doctors Myers and Buford would give a brief synopsis of their credentials, background, et cetera.
Oh, I am remiss for not asking for that. I did not provide an appropriate introduction either for Dr. Myers or Dr. Buford, really. So go ahead and share with the audience what they're asking.
Steve, you want to go first, or?
Sure, I'll go. So my name is Steve Myers. I'm a primary care sports medicine physician in Fort Worth. I did family practice residency followed by fellowship in primary care sports medicine at UT Southwestern. I practice non-operative and regenerative orthopedics at the Bone and Joint Clinic in Fort Worth since 2003. I've gotten into regenerative medicine with PRP in 2007, added adipose autologous stem cell treatments to my practice in 2014. I'm involved in the IOF, International Orthopedics Foundation, which is a significant body in this space on the orthopedic side. I'm also a member of AMSSM, American Medical Society of Sports Medicine. Been very active in the regenerative space and for quite some time. I'm in a group of 8 physicians. I'm the only non-surgical physician in my group. The rest of my partners are all surgeons.
And I am a board certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine fellowship trained. I've been in practice now. This is my, 21st year. I trained at UT Southwestern here in Dallas in orthopedic residency, went back to do a sports fellowship in Los Angeles. Still have a reasonably busy surgical practice post-COVID as much as possible. Been doing regenerative medicine for approximately 9 or 10 years. I think my first presentation to the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons was in 2011-ish, which means I started in about 2009. Been doing bone marrow concentrate injections for about 7 or 8 years as well. I've published in both areas, continue to do ongoing active clinical research. I'm the incoming president-elect of the organization Steve was just talking about, which is the Interventional Orthobiologics Foundation, which is an educational, ethics, and standards-based multidisciplinary organization that holds seminars and has training courses that are basically structured fellowship level educational, postgraduate educational level courses. I'm involved in the Biologic Alliance, which is a consortium of orthopedic surgeons and other specialties that are involved in this space, trying to have some standards and evidence-based guidelines for the practice of orthobiologics going forward. And I stay involved in education and discussions like this just to keep my ear to the ground. So, yeah.
Dr. Buford, does the organization have chiropractors as members too? You mentioned that it's multidisciplinary.
We do. One of our board members is Richard Striano from the East Coast, and he's on the board, and he's a chiropractor, very busy in the space. He's published and excellent, not only in regenerative medicine, but also with the ultrasound transducer in his hand. So yes, we do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other panelists have questions or comments before we move forward? With that, Mr. Fortner indicated to me that he doesn't have anything necessarily to add to Christopher's report regarding board complaints. So let's move on to agenda item 5. We have a number of attendees who were kind enough to join us, and I know that speaking on behalf of all of the panelists and organizers, we would love to hear from you. So this is what's in it for us. We've learned from each other here, and now we want to learn from our attendees out in the field and have the opportunity to answer your questions. So I'm not seeing any hands raised. This is, ladies and gentlemen, this is your opportunity to raise your hand and be recognized to ask a question or make a comment to support your contention or your cause.
There's actually a couple of hands up now. We've got.
Oh, I see. Kirsten Shepard Ahmed. I am going to unmute your mic. And if I didn't delete you completely, are you on the call? I think I clicked where I shouldn't have. Oh, yes.
My name is Dan Wagner. I believe you've unmuted my line.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Dr. Bronson.
Can you identify yourself as a DC
yes, sir.
or otherwise?
Yes. My name is Dan Wagner. I'm the Vice President of Sales and Marketing. I was invited to join the meeting, and I represent Signature Biologics, which was the aforementioned manufacturer in Dallas. With your permission, I'd like to address the meeting.
Yes, you do have my permission, and welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Bronson, and thank you to everybody who's joined here. Thank you, Dr. Wolford, Dr. Myers, Dr. Buford, and the rest. I think that I just wanted to comment that we at Signature Biologics and myself, speaking as an individual, feel that this conversation is very, very important. First and foremost and utmost for the safety of the patients and the populace that we all work to serve. And that as part of industry, and then you all as practitioners with your various and respective fields, that we all have independent roles to play in this to ensure that there is safety. And so I wanted to share with you all that from our meeting with Dr. Wolford, and to share with you as well, we absolutely go to every extent possible to ensure that people who are ordering our biologics products do have the right trained professional staff on site. We audit against NPI numbers in ordering products. We also do armchair audits, and we listen closely to what is being marketed and portrayed within the industry. And we feel that this protects us all. I think we're unified, if I can speak so forwardly, we're unified in the fact that there are a lot of issues with clarity in advertising. There are a lot of issues with misleading claims. And we feel that just as it is practitioners and their business's responsibility to make that clear to patients, it's also industry's responsibility to not become an echo chamber for those ideals, okay? And Signature Biologics is committed to the science to help ensure that it's not. On that point, I did want to make a couple of points of clarification as to what was discussed, and I appreciate very much, Dr. Wolford, you presented very well. Signature Biologics does not manufacture an amniotic fluid preparation, okay? We manufacture structural tissue allografts that are meant for homologous use. And what really differentiates what we're working on and the science that we're committed to, and we have numerous PhDs on staff, including our CEO, Dr. Neil Reardon, is that we focus on the tissue constructs as opposed to cellular isolates. And so in the construct of this discussion, we would agree there are no allogeneic stem cell therapies for orthopedic use, right? Because that would rely on metabolic activity. And furthermore, it would be a cellular isolate, which generally has no, in an allogeneic fashion, has no homologous use component, in our opinion, okay, and solely our opinion. And so for those purposes, we do not advertise as stem cells. These are biologic and regenerative products that have structural tissue characteristics such as cushioning and to serve as barriers. and we've had a tremendous safety record, and will be continued committed to that safety and quality management record. But I just wanted to add that comment and point of clarity, but also for the purposes of this meeting, to affirm that we feel that it is just as important as industry partners to be committed to those same standards of making sure that products are only distributed and commercialized into the right authorized hands, and that we don't permit or continue to echo wrong or false advertising claims into the marketplace that may place patients or practitioners at odds with what is the science out there. And so for that, thank you for letting me speak, and thank you for letting me join your meeting today.
We appreciate your participation, Mr. Wagner, and your input. Next, I will call upon Kirsten Shepard Ahmed.
Hi. First of all, I want to thank you all for offering this forum. I am a chiropractor who has been working in a multidisciplinary practice for over 14 years. One of the therapies that we do offer is regenerative medicine, and in our practice, we no longer have been advertising them as stem cells. We have been advertising them as biologics. What I have seen and heard of from other patients that have come into our practice from multitudes of groups, not just chiropractors, but also some orthopedic facilities that are advertising stem cell therapies, and they're actually using PRP and other modalities that aren't, that don't have any live or have had any live stem cells in there. With a lot of the companies that are FDA or claiming that they are FDA cleared or have been FDA approved that are marketing to multidisciplinary practices and stating that they do have stem cells, how would you all, and specifically I'm addressing this to the orthopedic specialists that are doing true stem cell therapy in their offices, but how would you go about working with practitioners such as ourselves that want to make sure that our patients are getting verifiable and have the resources to get the care that they need, but also how do we address this as a unified front of practitioners to help streamline the type of services that are being offered to our patients, because it's really disappointing when you hear these horror stories about individuals paying $30,000+ for therapy that is basically snake oil. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you for your input, Dr. Ahmed. I believe she specifically asked for your opinion, Dr. Buford.
Well,
Dr.
yeah, no, I'll go first, I guess this time, Steve. There's a lot to unpack there, obviously. I think that the responsibility comes from the clinician to truly understand what they're delivering. And long gone are the days when we can trust a slick marketing brochure or website or a chart, because like Steve mentioned, those have been forged. There's been forgeries on university letterhead in this market, stating that there was a living stem cell count when there really wasn't. And so that makes it doubly hard for somebody who's trying to do the right thing to know where to go. And so your question is very, very appropriate. I tend to hang my hat where there's a consensus amongst people who I respect in the rest of their practice and who are not guided, have not made a lifestyle change in the last few years to go from doing one thing to just getting into regenerative medicine because they can buy something for $400 and sell it for $4,000. Which seems to be, unfortunately, the way some of us, and it's not just chiropractors, I'm not throwing any stones, there's plenty. In fact, one of the most egregious examples right now is an orthopedic surgeon who's advertising. stem cell therapy and advertising that he will bring you patients. And so it's not practice specific or specialty specific. So what I would tell you is that if you want to use these all allograft products as a regenerative therapy tool, that's fine. You have to make sure that you're not saying there's stem cells in it. For me personally, trying to stay evidence-based, I'd better find some peer-reviewed published literature for the condition I'm treating with that product. Or I really need to have a very long face-to-face with the patient. This is way out in left field. There's no data, not even a published study. And frankly, even in my busy practice, probably Steve, that didn't happen a whole lot. We're staying kind of as much as we can in our lane with where we have solid evidence. And so the farther you are away from that, the more suspect and the more suspicious you should be. The FDA has ruled frequently, and this is controversial, but it really shouldn't be. The FDA has ruled frequently that the injectable allograft products are non-homologous in orthopedics. They have said that every time they've had an opportunity to say that. And every time they've had an opportunity to say the same about an autograft product, they have not said that. Okay, the only ruling they had against bone marrow was when a practice was culturing the bone marrow. Okay, and in that big, long, years-long, $1 million federal lawsuit, at the end of that, they didn't say you can't use bone marrow. They just said bone marrow's fine. You can't culture the cells. That makes it a drug. And so with the allograft products, my concern for my fellow clinicians is you might be doing something inadvertently that the FDA continues to say doesn't meet Section 361 criteria, even though it's marketed to us that way every day. And I can give you multiple examples. The FDA gave out, I think it was the 13th or 14th RMAT, that advanced designation to speed things to market, to a company that was selling an injectable amniotic-based product. The FDA isn't in the business of wasting their time. They gave out this RMAT because they were saying that this is not homologous. If you want to market and sell this in humans, you need to have special dispensation, if you will, from the FDA. And so for another company to have a very similar amniotic product without that FDA RMAT or some other designation that allows them to market and use it in humans, I have to step back a little bit and say, well, here's something in black and white where the FDA said this. You may be right, but go ahead and get me something in writing from the FDA saying that that's the case. And so that's the trouble as a clinician in this field, is knowing how to stay safe and in your lane. I would urge you to lean on your colleagues in organizations like this, where you've got some people identified who are going to be the thought leaders and give you guidance on these questions, because they're tough questions and the answers change sometimes, often actually.
Thank you, Dr. Buford. I saw Matthew Mick's name on the among the attendees who wanted to ask a question, and now that's gone. So now I have Dr. Cynthia Tays, who has raised her hand. And so Dr. Tays, I will unmute your mic and feel free to take the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Bronson, and the panel. My question is this: where in the Chiropractic Act, our statute, and in the TBCE rules would there be an allowance for a Texas licensed DC to recommend a patient for stem cell or any other regenerative injections? That would be a direct referral for the treatment, is my question. I don't include in my question a referral to another professional for examination or treatment under their license. I'm asking about a direct referral for the treatment itself.
All right, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that, but I would like for our legal counsel to entertain the question. If he's there, you are, Christopher. Would you like to take this?
There isn't any. That's the bottom line. I mean, for a chiropractor to say that a patient that has been looked at, the diagnosis is made, and then for them to say you need to get this particular treatment, Chapter 201 wouldn't allow for that.
So to be clear, for a medical procedure that is out of scope for a chiropractor to administer or perform, it's also out of scope to order that procedure or prescribe it. Am I correct?
Right. I mean, you know, we've had these long discussions about differential diagnosis, et cetera. A chiropractor has a patient present with particular symptoms. You do your differential diagnosis. You think it might be X, X, which is something that is outside the scope of practice. The condition is you do a referral to the appropriate healthcare provider that can handle it within scope. It's up to that licensee under another agency's license to make the determination about what the proper treatment's going to be. But a chiropractor could not say, yes, you need to go get XYZ treatment that requires stem cells.
So
That's what I expected you to say, and I just wanted to make just one other comment. In that case, I don't see it very pertinent to go into FDA or non-FDA approved, or this type of injection or that type of injection for the DC that practices in the state.
I think
well,
that's generally right. I mean, the question that falls for our licensees is whether or not you're identifying a condition that can be handled by somebody holding a different license. As I mentioned before, I think our enforcement folks' problem comes in with multidisciplinary clinics in which the chiropractor is a little bit more involved because of financial incentive to do a referral to the other person holding a different type of license that's within that same practice, and that the proper diagnosis and procedures for doing a diagnosis really aren't followed. You need to go down see the guy next door. He'll give you the treatment I talked about. So in terms of like, okay, he's not injecting, the chiropractor isn't injecting anybody, somebody else under their different license is doing that, but nonetheless, that chiropractor was involved in directly turning that patient over to the other licensee or other license holder.
Dr. Tays, thank you for your questions and comments, and Christopher for your answer. Dr. Buford, you had something to add?
I mean, that business model is rampant, at least in the DFW area, if not the state, where a medical MD is given $1,000 to $2,000 a month stipend to be the medical director of the facility, so that they can then hire a nurse practitioner or a nurse or a PA to do the injections. And that doctor literally may never set foot in that facility ever. And that business model is one that's taught at seminars. I mean, I get emails from them because I don't know why I'm on the list, but I get emails from those seminars where people are explicitly taught how to set up that structure to do what sounds to me like a circumventing of the board scope of practice rules. And so her point is an excellent point. I think it's a very sticky wicket to have two people in the same office, one who's technically an employee but can do more in their scope of practice, can do these injections, and the one that actually owns the practice can't. I think it creates an incentive that's hard to manage.
Unfortunately, at the moment, that's the way the Business Organizations Code reads, that allows for these multidisciplinary setups. And I think, the flip side of it, we have problems with it, but I totally understand the arguments as to kind of integrated medicine. You want to have this holistic approach to dealing with patients, and it works well, but there seems to be a downside to it, and our licensees sometimes seem to be involved with it.
Okay, looking at attendees with questions, I see Donna Sanders. Donna, I'm going to unmute you, and I'd like for you to introduce yourself and ask your question or make your comment. You are self-muted.
Okay, I'm sorry. Am I on there now?
You are.
This is Dr. Mark Schultz. Donna Sanders had invited me to come to hear this, so that's why you got her name. And
What is your profession?
I'm a chiropractor.
Okay, thank you.
So I was listening to all this, and I was wondering, is there an appropriate way to set up a relationship with the MDDC relationship to work in doing this kind of regenerative therapy? I mean, I've listened to what y'all were talking about just now about the model of what Dr. Buford was saying. He's got, heard a lot about this model, but is there an appropriate way to set it up where the doctor is in the clinic with you, or how would you do this in order to be in compliance with this?
I'm sure that our executive director and general counsel will agree with me that the board is not in the business of designing business models for you. And perhaps Christopher, you might, or Patrick, go ahead and field this question, the rest of it.
Well, no, and I appreciate that question, and we get asked that a lot. As I mentioned before, the ability for DCs and MDs and RNs to join together in a multidisciplinary practice is something that's covered by the Texas Business Organizations Code. That is something that our board has zero jurisdiction over. There are a number of things involved that are business related that affect our licensees that our board just simply does not have a say over. I will say that, and maybe a couple of them are on the call today or not, there are a few attorneys that specialize in healthcare law for healthcare professionals here in Texas to help them navigate some of the odd little archaic things that occur under Texas law involving the regulation of healthcare professionals that are well versed in this question and understand the ins and outs as it pertains to the Business Organization Code. I would suggest that if you have a private attorney, you check with them on how to avoid causing a problem. It's a model that, again, like I said before, that has some benefits, but it also has some downsides. And so it's the downsides that we're concerned about. We're not trying to say, I don't think, I'm speaking for myself here, I guess, we're not trying to say that multidisciplinary business model is a bad thing. We're just concerned about when it doesn't work well. And this is an area, the stem cells, in scare quotes, is an area in which there seems to be some problems.
Okay, I have another question. Dr. Buford, could you tell me what you mean by homologous? I understand autologous, but what do you mean by homologous?
So yeah, that's a good question. It's debated at every meeting, and the bottom line is it's a phrase used in the FDA regulations as it relates to Section 361 HCTPs, and homologous use. They define it in black and white, but it's still not clear. What they are trying to say is that you're using a product in a location where the product essentially has a known function or action. And I'm very much paraphrasing there, okay? So to give you an example, bone marrow is involved in orthopedics. It's in the bone, it's involved in the healing process. We can show that bone marrow participates in fractures because when you break the bone marrow comes out and is involved in callus formation, it's involved in tendinopathies, all these things. So bone marrow, as an example, would be thought to be homologous in those orthopedic situations. If I take bone marrow and put it in the IV to treat neurologic inflammation, that is not homologous because bone marrow is not normally in our bloodstream and it's not normally across the blood-brain barrier. So that would be a non-homologous application of bone marrow, just to give you an example. And so my point before was these allograft products like amniotic fluid, I don't think there's amniotic fluid in a knee. And so that's the discussion that comes up when you decide what's homologous or not. And so years and years ago, they used to say there were stem cells in amniotic fluid, and that automatically, just by saying that, made them Section 351 with all the regulatory criteria required with that designation. They backed away from that when the literature started to show that wasn't true, but they're still failing, in my opinion, and in some cases FDA rulings back this up, they're still failing Section 361 criteria on the homologous use criteria, because umbilical cord blood, amniotic fluid, placental tissues, birth tissue products are not typically present in the orthopedic arena. There's an exception when they're used as a barrier or as a protective coating. So the implantable or surgical implants that are amniotic based are well established in foot and ankle surgery, for example, areas like that. But the injectable stuff has a real homologous use issue. And as the FDA continues to rule on these case by case examples that come up, they have not yet ruled that it is a homologous in orthopedics. And so that's my concern. But that's a long-winded answer to what homologous versus non-homologous.
Thank you. And I have one more question for Mr. Wolford. Explain to me then, because I don't understand why people would then just normally store their cords after a child's birth, and because I've got patients that tell me they've stored their cord for later use. If there's not going to be any stem cells in that for them to use later, because I've talked about this with people and they go, oh yeah, we've stored all of our children's cords for use later, and you're saying now that there's no viable cells, and so are these people being ripped off as well? I mean, my patients, I'm not going to tell them, no, that's not, you're paying money for this and it's not going to work. I mean, is this what I'm hearing from you, or not? I
think you didn't hear from me say that. What I'm saying is the process with amniotic products, that when they are cryogenically frozen, and I think Dr. Myers and Buford will agree with me, when they're cryogenically frozen, approximately 80 degrees below zero, when you thaw those out, those cells are dead. That's the process. You got to hear what I'm saying. When they're cryogenically frozen, as they have to be, when you take those particular products that are being injected, there is no evidence of live stem cells when they are thawed. I would ask the other doctors if they agree with that.
It's all in the thawing. You have to, often it's a day and a half long process and multiple culture media. If you just Google protocol for thawing out frozen cells, you'll see that it's very, very different from the insert on any of these products that we're talking about. So I think Scott's exactly right. The other problem, to your point about the cord blood stored, the only currently approved use for that is for pediatric, blood dyscrasias, pediatric malignancies. So we get asked that, probably Steve too gets asked that on a weekly basis. Hey, can I use the cord blood? And the answer is not in orthopedics, because that violates the homologous use at the very least. Probably a couple other regs. So you can't really use that in the clinical situations with which I'm familiar in regenerative medicine.
Well, one thing I would like, when you're talking about storing, the umbilical cord, that is really nothing what we're talking about as far as orthopedic use, like you're saying. And so I'm, again, with all respect, what you're asking, doctor, I don't know that has any relevance, again, with the use of the amniotic fluid preparations for orthopedic injection. And what we're trying to say is, and by no means has anybody said, hey, regenerative medicine and with all these amniotic fluid preparations has no purpose. I mean, there's a lot of good tissues, a lot of biomolecular structures that have great abilities to help healing. But again, for the purpose of this meeting, is we're trying to show that there are no live stem cells in that preparation. And that's been the big advertisement. A lot of people are going, hey, we're going to do stem cell injections. And in my opinion, based upon everything I've read, if it's a 361 product, there are not going to be live stem cells in it. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Dr. Myers, go ahead.
Just to follow up on Don's point and this umbilical cord, just to share a little bit of personal information, I went through IVF with my wife to have twin boys. There are ways to properly freeze and thaw cells. But the current methods of these birth tissue products that are sold over the counter, well, not over the counter, sold to your office, stored on a shelf or stored in a freezer, and then thawed in your hand, the cells are dead. There's a right way to do it, which I've been through with IVF, but the current use in this arena, it does not work. The cells are dead.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. We're going to be wrapping this up within a couple of minutes, but I want to give Mr. Fortner a chance to speak, and then we'll wrap up the meeting. Patrick?
Just to very briefly touch on the last couple of conversations we had as it relates to what the agency is currently looking at on complaints. It comes down to, do the stem cells fall under the definition of a legal stem cell that Mr. Burnett mentioned earlier, one that's actually laid out in statute? Is the chiropractor working with another medical professional who is then injecting cells that either do or do not fit that definition? And then, to what degree are they actually involved? Are they, it's a question of the feather pillow and the chicken soup. Feather pillow, the chicken is involved. Chicken soup, they are completely involved. And is there a monetary transaction that is contingent upon that patient being directly referred hand in glove to that next operator? And those are the types of investigations that we're looking at. We have to determine to what degree that chiropractor is saying, I think you probably ought to go see somebody, or I think you definitely need to go to the office that's just next to mine, and I'll introduce you to my partner. And these are not easy discussions to have. They're not easy investigations. It comes down to questions of false advertising, misleading advertising, out of scope practice, etc. And that's what our enforcement committee and our investigators have to deal with.
That's exactly the type of advice that I wanted to hear for our wrap up. And thank you for that, Mr. Fortner. Any panelists present want to offer advice for licensees and the profession on how to stay out of trouble, how to stay within the law, how to stay within the lane of chiropractic, how not to be accused of misleading the public and practicing outside the scope of practice? That's what I want to leave the attendees with. Anybody?
Well, I think Scott's point is the biggest take-home message, which is there's no functional stem cells in these allograft products as they're currently sold and used, which means that none of us should really be advertising stem cell procedures based on those products. There's a significant school of thought that we shouldn't be advertising stem cell procedures with bone marrow concentrate or adipose tissue products. And so I think that's another kind of point 1A to take home, is your advertising, but also your product. Not, again, to Scott's point, not saying it's not effective, not saying there may not be studies coming out that show it's effective for a particular use, but the advertising and the basis of that efficacy shouldn't be based on stem cells.
That's why we spent so much time here today talking about the science of this, is that so that people would not think that it's okay to call something that it's not, and to advertise it as such. And if from a chiropractic scope standpoint, you can't prescribe it or offer it directly if it's not something that is within scope. Christopher?
I guess in terms of advice, I mean, here's the thing. I mentioned the Business Organizations Code, which now permits these multidisciplinary practices, but there's still a provision in the Occupations Code that applies to all healthcare professionals, which basically says you all can't get paid for referrals. So it's kind of this strange situation, so that if, let's say, Dr. Wofford has a patient come in and he presents with XYZ symptoms, Dr. Wofford does his diagnosis and determines it's something that's outside of scope. He needs to send that patient off to somebody else. He can't have, there's no financial incentive that can be attached to that. Yet that same thing does not apply under the Business Organizations Code. So you end up with this situation, I think unintended, in the law under these multidisciplinary practices, in which the participants in them have a financial incentive to kind of keep the people within the four walls of that disciplinary practice. So I think anybody, our licensees, and I think anybody else that's regulated that could participate in multidisciplinary practices, I've seen a lot of the come-ons from these entities that are trying to get folks to do what they call stem cell therapies. And I would just tell you this, that if you get that pitch that says, okay, you spend X number of dollars, you're going to get 20 times back what you can charge. You know, if it's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. And we've had licensees that have fallen for that, and you kind of feel sorry for them that they got into it for probably what they thought were the right reasons, and it turned out biting them in the backside. So just be very, very careful in any come-ons that you get that try to get you involved with it. Try and stick with the science and not with the business.
Thank you for that. Regarding our board's enforcement, we really try to keep our licensees out of trouble. We don't want to see complaints come in, and so I think that's one of the values of having a stakeholder meeting like this for discussion purposes. I see we have 2.5 minutes left before my hard adjournment time. I do have another commitment. I do see two other hands raised. We can field these if they're quick. Quick question, quick answer. For anyone else that has a question, or if we don't adequately answer your questions, I would refer you to write to tbce@tbce.texas.gov. Write your question, and we'll give you an answer. I'm going to have, I see one hand that's still raised, and I will allow it. We only have about 1 minute. This would be Michelle Dunn. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thank you so much for this meeting. It's been extremely informative and just really glad to be on. I know we have just a limited amount of time, so I'll make this very quick. With the increased patient demand for things like multidisciplinary and integrative practices, has the board considered, because information is so crucial for all of us as we kind of navigate through what you guys referred to as the wild west earlier, has the board considered a possible annual gathering, if you will, for perhaps chiropractors that are identifying themselves as members of a multidisciplinary practice, partial owners of a multidisciplinary practice, so that we would all be on the same page and we would be able to hear from, you know, really the higher ups to make sure that we're navigating through this space appropriately.
Patrick, you want to field that question? What might we offer this licensee?
I would just urge you to keep up with information that we post on our website. If you've not kept up with your email to get our newsletters, any new information that is disseminated at board meetings or in between board meetings, that's going to be the best way to get that information. Beyond that, you might reach out to the various continuing ed providers and also associations to find out if they'd be willing to do that type of dissemination as well.
I want to thank Mr. Patrick Fortner, Mr. Christopher Burnett, Dr. Steve Myers, Dr. Don Buford, Dr. Scott Wofford, Dr. Deborah White for your participation on the panel. And I want to thank all of our attendees that chose to spend your afternoon with us here, and especially those that asked questions. Again, if you have any further questions, TBC, what is it? TBCE at tbce.texas.gov. Real easy. There you go on the screen. And with that, I thank you all and wish you all a good afternoon.